She did not take any special pills. She did not follow a trending diet. She did not spend money on expensive supplements or visit a single specialist in years. When reporters finally sat down with Antoinette Villeneuve on the morning of her 112th birthday, the first thing she did was pour herself a cup of dark, bitter tea, tear a small piece of whole grain bread, and drizzle olive oil over a bowl of sliced tomatoes before the interview even began. That was her ritual. That was her morning. That had been her morning for longer than most people in the room had been alive. What was she eating that the rest of the world was not? That question has haunted researchers, physicians, nutritionists, and curious individuals for generations. Human beings have chased the idea of a long and healthy life since the beginning of recorded history. We have built entire industries around the concept. We have written books, launched supplement brands, produced studies, and constructed elaborate health philosophies, all in pursuit of answers. And yet, sitting quietly in villages across Japan, Greece, Italy, Costa Rica, and California, people have been living past 100 for centuries without making a single headline about it. They just ate. They cooked simply. They stayed close to the land and close to their communities. And they outlived nearly everyone around them. The science community has a name for the places where these people cluster. They are called blue zones, and they represent some of the most intensely studied human populations on the planet. Researchers identified 5 regions where people not only live the longest, but remain functional, active, and largely free from the chronic diseases that define aging everywhere else. What they found when they looked at the diets in these regions was not complicated. There were no biohacking protocols. There were no elaborate meal timings or exotic superfoods imported from the other side of the world. There was simplicity. There was consistency. And there were specific foods that appeared again and again across cultures, languages, and geographic distances. 9 of them became impossible to ignore. This is not about a miracle. It is not about genetics alone, though genetics certainly plays a role. It is about the daily choices made over a lifetime, the quiet rituals that compound across decades into something extraordinary. Researchers at Harvard, the National Institute on Aging, and institutions across Europe have spent years trying to understand why certain populations simply age better than others. The conclusions they have reached point, more than anything else, to what goes on a plate. And when you trace the diets of the world's oldest verified humans, including people who have reached 110, 115, and even beyond, a pattern begins to emerge that is both surprising and deeply encouraging. What follows is the story of 9 foods that show up in the lives of the world's longest-lived people with a consistency that cannot be explained away as coincidence. Each one carries a body of scientific evidence behind it. Each one connects to a real person, a real life, and a real number of birthdays that most of us will never reach. You are about to hear some of those stories. And when you do, you may never look at your kitchen the same way again. The first food is one that almost every culture on Earth grows, cooks, and eats in some form. Beans, legumes, lentils, whatever you call them, wherever you find them, they appear at the center of the longest-lived diets on the planet with a regularity that researchers find almost impossible to overstate. In Sardinia, Italy, there's a family that once held the Guinness World Record as the longest-living family in recorded history. Their secret, according to the researchers who spent years studying them, was a lunch they ate together every single day. A 3-bean minestrone soup, whole grain sourdough bread, and a small glass of red wine. That was it. Day after day, year after year, decade after decade. And that family collectively accumulated more verified years of human life than almost any group on record. Beans are not glamorous. They do not come in sleek packaging. They do not carry the marketing budget of a protein shake or a vitamin subscription. But they deliver something that almost nothing else in the human diet can match. They are high in fiber, high in plant-based protein, low in fat, and they feed the gut microbiome in ways that researchers are only beginning to fully understand. The gut, it turns out, is deeply connected to immune function, mental health, inflammation levels, and even how cells age over time. Feeding it well may be one of the most powerful things a person can do, and beans feed it exceptionally well. Researchers studying blue zone populations have concluded that people in those regions eat at least half a cup to a full cup of beans every single day. In Okinawa, Japan, they favor soy-based foods like tofu and edamame. In Ikaria, Greece, they cook lentils and chickpeas with local herbs and olive oil. In Loma Linda, California, the Seventh-day Adventist community, which has one of the highest concentrations of centenarians in the United States, built an entire plant-based dietary philosophy around legumes. The pattern is global. The evidence is consistent. And yet the average modern diet has replaced the humble bean with processed alternatives that age the body from the inside out. The second food on this list may surprise you, and it certainly surprised the researchers who kept finding it. Olive oil, not as a side note, not as a cooking alternative, as a central, daily, generous part of the meal. In Ikaria, Greece, researchers discovered that middle-aged residents who consumed approximately 6 tablespoons of olive oil every day were cutting their risk of dying in half compared to those who consumed less. That is not a small effect. That is a dramatic, measurable difference that cannot be attributed to a single variable. The olive oil story is about more than fat. It is about a specific type of fat, polyphenol, antioxidants, and anti-inflammatory compounds that work at the cellular level to slow down biological aging. The people of Ikaria did not know any of that science. They just knew what their grandparents had always done. They drizzled olive oil on everything. Jean-Louise Calment, the most verified oldest human being in recorded history, lived to 122 years old. She was French, she was sharp until very late in her life, and she had a few dietary habits that researchers noted with great interest. She ate chocolate daily. She drank the occasional glass of port wine, and she consumed olive oil consistently, both in her food and, reportedly, on her skin. Whether the olive oil was responsible for her remarkable lifespan is something researchers debate, but what is not debatable is the evidence that has accumulated around this ingredient across multiple populations and multiple decades of scientific study. The cells of people who consume it regularly look different under a microscope. They age more slowly. The science is there, and it has been building quietly for a very long time. The third food is leafy greens, and the research behind them is almost overwhelming in its consistency. Spinach, kale, collard greens, beet tops, chard, turnip greens, and dozens of regional varieties that grow in gardens and fields across the world's longest-lived communities. In Ikaria alone, researchers have documented more than 75 varieties of edible greens that local residents consume regularly, many of which contain polyphenol concentrations 10 times higher than what is found in red wine. These are not exotic imports. They are the plants that grow wild around homes, that fill kitchen gardens, that appear in soups, stews, and salads at nearly every meal. And their impact on human health is extraordinary. Studies tracking middle-aged adults over a 4-year period found that those who consumed the equivalent of just 1 cup of cooked greens daily were half as likely to die during that period compared to those who ate no greens at all. Half as likely. That is a number that should stop people in their tracks. It is not a marginal benefit. It is a profound one. The mechanism behind it involves multiple pathways, including antioxidant protection, anti-inflammatory activity, support for cardiovascular health, and the presence of nutrients like folate, vitamin K, magnesium, and lutein that are deeply involved in cellular maintenance and brain health. The oldest people on Earth have eaten their greens consistently, not because a doctor told them to, but because those greens were simply part of the food culture they were born into. The fourth food is one that tends to provoke skepticism until people see the research. Nuts. A small handful daily of almost any variety has been linked in study after study to significantly better health outcomes and longer life. The Blue Zone dietary research identifies nuts as one of 4 cornerstone eating habits shared by centenarian populations across the world. Walnuts, almonds, peanuts, pistachios, and other varieties all appear across different communities. What they share is a dense nutritional profile that includes healthy fats, plant proteins, fiber, magnesium, vitamin E, and specific compounds that support heart and brain health. Eating a small amount daily, consistently, over a lifetime, adds up to something significant. The fifth food is one that has been consumed by humans for thousands of years, and that shows up in the daily routines of centenarians with almost comical frequency. Tea. Not a specific variety necessarily, though green tea in Okinawa and herbal teas in Ikaria have been particularly studied, but tea as a concept, as a ritual, as a daily act of consuming plant-based compounds in liquid form. The polyphenol in tea, particularly the catechins in green tea and the flavonoids in other varieties, have been shown to support cardiovascular health, reduce inflammation, and even play a role in cellular protection against the kind of damage that accumulates over time and drives aging. In Okinawa, centenarians have consumed green tea daily for their entire lives. In Ikaria, herbal teas made from locally grown plants like sage, mint, rosemary, and chamomile are brewed fresh and consumed every evening. The sixth food is sweet potatoes, and the story behind them is one of the most compelling in all of longevity research. Okinawa, Japan has produced more people who have lived past 100 than almost anywhere else on Earth. For most of the 20th century, Okinawans consumed sweet potatoes as their primary carbohydrate source. Not white rice, not refined bread, not processed grains. Sweet potatoes. Specifically, a purple variety called Beniimo that is native to the region and packed with anthocyanins, the same family of compounds responsible for the deep color of blueberries and red cabbage, and associated with powerful anti-inflammatory and antioxidant effects. For decades, this was what Okinawan elders ate as the foundation of nearly every meal. And they were statistically the longest-lived people in one of the longest-lived nations on Earth. Researchers who have studied the Okinawan dietary pattern note that the sweet potato provided a low-glycemic, nutrient-dense energy source that supported stable blood sugar, healthy gut function, and sustained energy throughout long, active days spent working, walking, and tending gardens. It is deeply relevant that when Okinawan dietary habits began shifting toward a more westernized pattern after decades of outside influence, the longevity statistics began to shift as well. The lesson is not that sweet potatoes are magic. The lesson is that what happens when you replace a consistent, whole, plant-based carbohydrate with processed alternatives can be measured in years of human life. The seventh food ties together threads that appear across nearly every blue zone community on Earth, and that is whole grains. Sourdough bread made from ancient wheat varieties in Sardinia, barley in Ikaria, oats in various communities across Northern Europe. The centenarian populations of the world have consistently consumed whole, minimally processed grains as part of their daily diet, and the research on why this matters is extensive. Whole grains feed beneficial gut bacteria, support stable blood sugar regulation, reduce cardiovascular inflammation, and provide a steady source of fiber that has been linked to lower rates of colon disease, heart disease, and metabolic dysfunction. The difference between a whole grain and a refined one is not just nutritional. At the level of gut health and cellular inflammation, it can be profound. The eighth food is one that shows up in a way that is almost amusing in its consistency across the stories of the world's oldest people. Fish. Not every centenarian eats it, but it appears frequently enough to draw scientific attention. Violet Brown of Jamaica, who lived to 117 years old, ate fish regularly throughout her life alongside locally grown produce like sweet potatoes, breadfruit, mangoes, and oranges. In coastal blue zone communities, particularly in Ikaria and Sardinia, fish provides a lean, omega-3 rich protein source that supports brain health, cardiovascular function, and anti-inflammatory processes in the body. The omega-3 fatty acids found in fatty fish like sardines, mackerel, and salmon have been extensively studied for their role in reducing the risk of heart disease and cognitive decline, two of the most common pathways through which aging takes a destructive turn. The ninth food is dark chocolate, and the story behind it is perhaps the most delightful in this entire conversation. Jean-Louise Calment, who lived longer than any other verified human being in history, ate more than 2 pounds of dark chocolate every single week. Kane Tanaka of Japan, who lived to 119 years old and held the verified record as the oldest living person on Earth before her passing, loved chocolate and made no secret of it. Sister André, a French nun who reached 118 years old, also consumed chocolate as part of her daily routine. These are not isolated anecdotes. They are a pattern. And when researchers look at the science of dark chocolate, particularly the flavonoid-rich, high-cacao variety, they find evidence of cardiovascular benefit, antioxidant activity, and even potential cognitive support. The key distinction that researchers always make is that the chocolate consumed by these centenarians was not the sugar-laden, heavily processed confections that fill most grocery store shelves. It was dark chocolate with a high cacao content, rich in flavonoids, and low in added sugar. The compounds in cacao have been shown to improve blood flow, support healthy blood pressure, and reduce the oxidative stress that accumulates in cells over time. Whether it was chocolate that helped these individuals reach their extraordinary ages is impossible to say with certainty. But the consistency with which it appears in their stories, combined with what science now knows about its active compounds, makes it impossible to dismiss. What is perhaps most powerful about this entire conversation is not any individual food on this list. It is the pattern they form together. These 9 foods share a common thread. They're all whole. They're all minimally processed. They're all rich in compounds that work at the level of cells, gut bacteria, cardiovascular tissue, and brain chemistry to slow down the processes that drive aging. None of them are expensive. None of them require a prescription. None of them demand that you overhaul your life overnight. They're the kinds of foods that have been available to human beings for thousands of years, and for most of human history, they were simply called food. It is only in the last century or so, as processed and refined alternatives have flooded the marketplace, that these ordinary ingredients have become remarkable by comparison. The oldest people on Earth did not optimize their diets with a spreadsheet. They did not track macros or obsess over calorie counts. They ate what grew near them. They cooked with care. They shared meals with people they loved. And they did it consistently, day after day, for 100 years and beyond. The researchers who have studied them most closely consistently come back to the same conclusion. It was not one meal. It was not one food. It was the accumulation of small, daily choices made over an entire lifetime. And those choices, repeated 10,000 times, built something that no pharmaceutical intervention has yet been able to replicate. The invitation in all of this is not to become someone you are not. It is not to abandon your culture or your preferences or the foods that bring you joy. It is to look honestly at what has been proven to work across generations and geographies and populations, and to find the version of it that fits your life. Add more beans to the plate. Drizzle olive oil where you used to use something else. Steep a cup of tea in the evening instead of reaching for something processed. Eat a handful of dark leafy greens more days than not. These are not dramatic gestures. They are quiet ones. But in the story of the world's oldest people, it is the quiet things that have always mattered most. The rituals, the consistency, the ordinary ingredients that, over the course of a long and well-lived life, turned out to be anything but ordinary.